Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. This is a very different study group than what we usually do because it's not a study group at all. I wanted to bring our expert, Charlotte Herring, on. I have known Charlotte for probably over 10 years now. We went to college together, and she's going to work today through some mind-body medicine and mindset work because as we know, as we're preparing for a test, this is really important information. And as social workers in the helping profession, we can use skills around our mind-body connection, self-care, and grounding. So I'm very excited to have her here. She's gonna be working with agents of change pretty closely. She's gonna give us a lot of expert knowledge. She has more of a medical background, which is great. And I'm sure she's worked with social workers in her many hospital positions in the past. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Charlotte, who's going to be leading us today.
Hey all, it is so nice to meet you guys. My name is Charlotte Herring. My clinical title is that I am a board certified adult geriatric nurse practitioner. I've worked in the healthcare field since 2011, so I really do understand what it's like to be in the field, out working, and just navigating a lot of the challenges that we have as healthcare workers and as helpers and healers that want to help make their corner of the world, our corner of the world, a better place, while also not sacrificing our own needs. And that can be pretty hard, I think, as healers. We oftentimes fill everyone else's cup before we fill our own. And so just a little bit about me, again, just so you're like, who is this person and what are her credentials? I went to Michigan back in the day with Megan and graduated in 2011 with a bachelor's in cognitive neuroscience, then went on and did a bachelor's in nursing, a master's in nursing, worked in a VA hospital, worked in very traditional roles for a while. And really since about 2012, I've been integrating mind-body practices into my clinical roles. I became a registered yoga teacher, a Reiki practitioner, and then I trained with the Center for Mind-Body Medicine to become a provider of mind-body skills groups and mind-body medicine. So kind of was like a slow trickle of recognizing this importance of the mind-body connection in my own clinical practice, as well as in my own personal life. As somebody who's definitely had anxiety when it came to my boards or came to final exams or applying to jobs, these practices that we're going to talk about today were really, really helpful for me. They've been really helpful for my patients, and I'm really excited to share them with you. So just to back up a little bit for some learning objectives today. So number one, just describing what am I talking about when I talk about mind-body medicine? And also that will include an overview of the nervous system. This is likely something that a lot of y'all know, so we'll go through it pretty quickly, but just the different branches of the nervous system and what we're talking about with nervous system activation and nervous system dysregulation. These are buzzwords that we hear a lot, but just kind of diving into a little bit deeper. And also to offer some pragmatic examples of the mind-body connection, ways that we can see this in both our own bodies as well as in our own practices day to day. The other thing we're going to do is clarify the basic building blocks of building what I like to refer to as a mind-body toolkit, and outline the evidence that supports the use of these skills. So again, we don't want to just be throwing out skills willy-nilly, where there's some actual really good evidence showing the utilization of these skills among healthcare workers to do things like reduce burnout, improve job satisfaction, all of those kind of good things that we want to bring into our work. We'll also describe examples of how to utilize a mind-body toolkit in regards to test preparation specifically, which I hope y'all are excited about, because I think those will be some kind of tangible nuggets. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about mindset and the idea of inner knowing and witnessing, self-witnessing, and then describe some strategies for being mindful of your body, of your mindset, of your energy, so that you can walk into your test, you can walk into your client visits and feel empowered and kind of present in that moment. So
I have a quick note. This will be recorded and Charlotte has agreed to share her slides. So no need to take down note word for word what she's going through today. You will have access to this. So feel free to tune in and just follow along as you'd like.
Yeah. And so just like when we got started, we started off with that one word of when you think about test taking, what comes to mind. I'd like us to just tap in right now, if it's all right with you guys, and just tap into how our bodies are feeling right now. So wherever you're sitting, go ahead and if you can, rest your feet on the floor. Your hands can be rested whatever way feels comfortable, palm up, palm down, clasped together, whatever feels good. And go ahead and take a big deep breath through the nose and sigh it out the mouth. We're going to do that 2 more times together, breathing in through the nose, sighing out the mouth. Try and make some noise. Perfect. And one more big deep breath through the nose. And exhale out the mouth. And now go ahead, if it feels safe for you, you can let your eyes close. If it doesn't feel safe, you want to keep your eyes open, that's okay too. Try and just gently focus your eyes on a point in front of you. And just take a moment. We've been running probably from thing to thing, activity to activity. And just take a moment to be here in your body right now. And notice, scanning from the top of your head, slowly down to the tips of your toes, how your body is feeling today. And if things come up, things you say, ouch, this part hurts, or this part's yelling at me for attention, that's okay. This is simply an exercise in scanning the body and seeing what it's trying to tell us. Seeing what comes up. And similarly, if thoughts or emotions are running through your mind right now, that's okay. See if you can imagine them like clouds passing in the sky, and you're watching them pass and just witnessing. So if you hear yourself in the internal chatter, start to think about what to make for dinner, or what that noise in the background is, or something that happened at work today. See if you can just tag it as thinking. If sensations or feelings come up in the body, that's okay. See if you can just tag them as feeling. And we'll stay here for just another moment, getting acquainted with those thoughts, feelings, and sensations that might be coming up today. Not judging, not trying to push anything away, but just noticing. And whenever you're ready, you can go ahead. You can open your eyes. If something came up that you want to share with the group, you can feel free to put it in the chat box. No pressure either way. This is a more personal activity. That's also perfect. But so one of the things that we do when we tap into the present moment and we start to just notice our thoughts, our feelings, and our sensations that are in the body is that it helps just to give us, like we said, more information. And that's the kind of benchmark or the bedrock of mind-body medicine. So I did a training program through the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. There are a number of different mindfulness organizations and things that are all talking about the same concept of mind-body practices and mind-body connection. And what we're talking about is we're focusing on that powerful interaction between our minds, our bodies, and the environments that we navigate. And so there's this bilateral conversation between the thoughts, the feelings, the beliefs, and the attitudes that we have, and how that can affect and shape literally every aspect of our biological functioning. And in turn, what happens in our bodies, how we take care of our body, how we practice self-care, things like nutrition, sleep, exercise, all of those things, that can in turn really affect how we think and feel and what we believe. And so mind-body medicine techniques and practices, some of these are more ancient practices like yoga. Some of these are more modern practices like biofeedback, or the ability for us to look at our physiologic response in response to various stimuli. So things like meditation, how does that impact your heart rate? Things of that nature. But so all of these techniques can really be integrated into our daily lives, affect health, have an impact on overall well-being. And they're also incredibly helpful to bring into our clinical practices as clinicians. And in the aspect of when we're working through a major event and we want to fortify a toolbox of skills we can utilize, like taking a board exam, these can just be really helpful for that. So I want to back up and just kind of do a quick review of the nervous system. And so these are the different branches of the nervous system. We've got the central nervous system, which is our brain and spinal cord, and our peripheral nervous system, which is everything else throughout the body. And what we're really going to focus on is this autonomic nervous system. Okay, so our autonomic nervous system, this is a branch of our peripheral nervous system that activates involuntary processes, so like heart rate, breathing, etc. And there's two branches that make up that nervous system: our parasympathetic nervous system, or our rest and relax response, and our sympathetic nervous system, or our gas pedal, our activation, our fight or flight response. And so it's really interesting, and it can be helpful to think about these two branches of the nervous system working like the brake pedal and the gas pedal. So the parasympathetic brake pedal, when we're healthy, it helps us maintain equilibrium, relaxation. It helps slow our breathing. It helps produce things like oxytocin, endorphins. Do you have a question?
Charlotte, someone had a question if you could quickly explain biofeedback.
Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah, biofeedback is utilizing technology or utilizing external processes to look at how our body responds to certain stimuli. So for example, one way that we can oftentimes do this is if you've got an Apple Watch and you track your heart rate. So by monitoring, let's say after doing 5 minutes of meditation and watching our heart rate slowly go down, we're watching in real time that nervous system, kind of the nervous system activation more towards this parasympathetic rest and relax response, right? As our heart rate slows down, and we get to watch that in real time and then get feedback on that. So that's why we call it biofeedback. And any other questions, let me know. So we've got this brake pedal, again, that rest and relax response, and then the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response. Okay, so in a healthy kind of balance between those two things, we need both, right? We need the sympathetic nervous system because that is the thing that mobilizes our body for action. We are at the core animals, right? And so when we were living on the savannah and we saw a cheetah, we sure as heck wanted a part of our nervous system that said, okay, I'm ready to run. I got to go. My breathing rate's going to increase. My heart rate's going to increase. Things like adrenaline and cortisol are going to rush through my body. All of these things so that I can get ready to act. And so both of these things in and of themselves are just pieces of the nervous system. And really what happens is when we get outside of what we call a zone or a window of tolerance, where those two, the gas and the brake, are working in sync and they're keeping each other in check with those two branches of the nervous system, we want to stay within what we call that window of tolerance. When we have too much of the gas pedal, that fight or flight response, we can become anxious, defensive, irritable, angry, right? That hyper arousal state that I think a lot of us have experienced before. I definitely know I have, with being in that fight or flight response. A lot of times our anxieties, our worries about something that is to come, that is our sympathetic nervous system in activation, right? Things like our parasympathetic nervous system, that brake pedal, we want to have a healthy amount of that rest and relax response. If we have too much of that response, however, we can become numb, things like depression, dissociation, lethargy, all of those things. So the main point when I kind of explain this is that we really want to stay in what we call a nervous system regulation and a balance of those two branches of the nervous system. And so oftentimes what mind-body practices do is their goal is to help us bring back into that window of tolerance where we can think and feel simultaneously. And it's that window that we think it might not always be easy, it might not always be pleasant, but we can deal, right? It's that window that we can deal in. And so this, just to outline how connected the mind and the body are. This is just a very complicated graphic, and my main point, you don't really need to take anything away from this, except if you look at the left side, that's a sympathetic nervous system. The right side, we've got the parasympathetic nervous system, and just take a look at how all of those different nervous system innervations, how all of these different parts of the body are innervated by the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Everything from our intestines to our bladder to our stomach, our heart, our lungs, our skin, and whether or not we produce sweat. I'm not sure if any of you, when I walk into a testing site, sometimes my palms get really sweaty. That's your skin's response to your sympathetic nervous system activation. So the main point of this slide is just to show, again, that there's that constant communication going on between the mind and the body. And a few places that we can see this mind-body connection. One really important connection piece that I think is getting a lot more press, perhaps, than it was before, is the connection between our gut, our GI tract, and our brain, or that gut-brain axis. So we've actually learned that we produce over 90% of serotonin in our gut, and that our gut literally is what we call, it's a second brain. And there's a lot of research going on about the importance of the intestinal microbiota or microbiome, so healthy gut bacteria, and how having healthy gut bacteria can actually improve mood. It can reduce symptoms of depression, of stress, and vice versa. When you have a microbiome that is, you've taken a ton of antibiotics, or we have a diet that's really low in fresh food, things like that, that sometimes that can impact our mental health for the adverse. And so again, as we learn as clinicians and we start to explore and kind of question this idea that the mind and the brain are over here, right? And the body is over here, and that the two aren't really talking to each other that much, we're starting to learn just how interconnected all of these things are. Our GI system also has an impact on our immune function. It has an impact on inflammation in the body. And there's a lot of really interesting research going on right now about the influence between psychiatry and immunology, or the study of the immune system, endocrinology, or the study of the endocrine system and hormones, the nervous system, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really exciting time as we're learning a lot more about that mind-body connection and learning the science behind it. And another just really nice example I like to give to help to articulate this mind-body connection and the idea that our brain, as soon as our mind is thinking something, our body is already beginning to be primed to act on that. Is we're going to do one more quick little example, that I'd like you to close your eyes, and I'd like you to imagine that you've got a lemon wedge in your hand, a lemon wedge for like a drink or a beverage. And I want you to imagine bringing that lemon wedge up to your mouth and taking a bite of the lemon. And as you take a bite of the lemon, I want you to notice if you feel an increase in salivation in your mouth, if you feel a pucker in your lips or your mouth. And again, that's a powerful example of our body having a response to eating a lemon that's just in our head. Right? So I think that's a really cool kind of example of just how, again, that communication is constant and ongoing in both directions. I wanted to take a minute if there's any pressing questions that were coming up in the chat that I could answer.
Someone asked about the gut health and pain and how that is connected, or if it's connected.
Yeah, definitely. So we have pain receptors throughout our entire body, right? And I could go really, really deep into that, but essentially our pain receptors, yes, there's definitely an impact with our nervous system, our GI system. I'd have to do a little bit of research on exactly what that is. I know that one of the things our GI system has is what's called endocannabinoid receptors. Endocannabinoids are compounds in the body that can be anti-inflammatory and also be pain alleviating. So there's just a lot of really interesting stuff. So that's definitely something I'll do more digging on that as well. And then in kind of a follow-up email, I'd love to share more about that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, of course. And so, all right, so getting to a little bit more of the meat of, so what does building a mind-body toolkit look like? And we're going to go through each of these with more tangible examples for how you can bring these into your test taking prep. But just for the kind of, for the purpose of explaining what I'm talking about, these are going to be things like breath work. And again, if you've ever tried any of these, I'd love to hear in the chat as well. If you're like, ooh, I love that, or I've tried this, or I'd like to try that. Because there's a lot of different practices that are pretty cool. So breath work, or doing breathing to activate that parasympathetic nervous system, or to move energy through the body. There's a lot of different ways we can do breath work. Guided imagery or visualization work, where we either, similar to that lemon example, where we imagine eating a lemon, we can go through visualizations where we imagine ourselves in a safe space if we're feeling activated, or we're feeling our nervous system is feeling dysregulated and we feel like we need some relief. We can do visualization work where we imagine an outcome like a test, and we visualize how we'd like to feel walking into that. So this kind of guided imagery or visualization work. Meditation, which meditation is really just present moment awareness. It's not always sitting on a mat like the Buddha, in this posture. It can be, there's a lot of different ways to meditate, but the idea is coming back and being aware and just noticing what's going on in the body. So that opening a little exercise we did, that's a short little meditation. Grounding exercises, which are another way of bringing yourself back into the present moment. By grounding yourself in your environment, by being able to identify things that you can see or hear or smell or feel within your environment. Movement practices are incredibly helpful. Movement helps to activate that parasympathetic nervous system, especially when we move the body and do things like shaking or dancing. There's a reason why almost every single culture incorporates song and dance into their practices, into their just cultural practices or religious practices, because that really can be an energetically very powerful experience, and can also, again, from the scientific side, help to activate that parasympathetic or rest and relax response. Another thing is energy tracking, or being aware of our energy throughout the day, just tracking how we feel throughout the day. What helps us feel depleted? What helps us feel more activated or more like our cup is full and feel nourished? But getting curious, again, approaching with gentle curiosity, what our day-to-day, how we feel as we move through our day-to-day. And then the ultimate kind of last thing that I think is one of the most important and really ties into why we're all here is community and connection, right? It's so important. We as human beings, we are communal creatures. And we know that things like depression, anxiety, burnout, increased stress, that these things fester in isolation, and that by connecting with community, and in the case of agents of change, connecting with a community that has a common goal, that can be incredibly powerful. And there's actually research showing that helps to do things like reduce average heart rate, bring down, again, that parasympathetic rest or relax response, so that being around others and connecting with others can really be a super important tool for our toolkit. And before we go into kind of more specific examples of those, I wanted to kind of put a couple slides just to ask, again, we need some evidence to prove why, or to kind of explain why would we bring these things in? What's the evidence say? And so mind-body medicine, it helps to counter stress physiology, as we said. It helps to support mindfulness, self-awareness of our emotions, thoughts, sensations, helps us encourage healthy behaviors by turning the focus back inward on what we need, what our bodies, our minds need in that moment. And there's a couple really interesting studies that I just picked a couple, and you don't have to read through all of these. The main point of this is that there were a couple different studies that look specifically at implementing mind-body strategies in healthcare workers to see if it helped them do things like feel less burned out, feel more accomplished with their work, feel more satisfied, things of that nature. And so this study looked at the impact of mind-body medicine and skills training on burnout. And they found that there was a really statistically significant improvement in changes in exhaustion, personal accomplishment, compassion, satisfaction, burnout, all of these things that basically, we're finding that these mind-body skills can help mitigate burnout and improve well-being among healthcare workers. And I don't know about y'all, but especially after the last couple of years working in healthcare, it's been a hard couple of years. And I think a lot of us are feeling pretty burned out right now in the capacities we're working in. And so what a beautiful kind of testament to the power of these skills. Yes, Megan.
Yes, we have a few questions, and I think there's some really good ones.
Yeah.
Someone asked, this is a really good one. What do you do if you're working with someone that maybe has cultural beliefs and they're not really sold on mind-body medicine? Like, where do you meet them? How do you kind of get them to see that there is a lot of evidence behind that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that a lot of what I do in my professional day-to-day work is that bridge, is having that conversation with Western trained providers about the benefits of incorporating integrative practices into our healthcare. And so oftentimes meeting the person, if you're sharing this with, let's say, a client, meeting the client where they're at and approaching their mindset around mind-body medicine with gentle curiosity, asking, you know, kind of what the fear or what the belief is. And then explaining in a non-confrontational way, just saying, you know, there is quite a bit of good evidence on this. Actually, that I had an old therapist once that said medication or meditation are two of the things that change the brain the most. And there's quite a bit of evidence for the use of these practices. And oftentimes I found with my clients, we start off with something really small and really tangible. So something like the lemon example, just to get the idea of connecting that mind and the body, the idea that our thoughts are actually impacting our physiologic function. But by starting that conversation off little by little by little, we can slowly start to open up the door to that conversation. And so definitely it's a question that I think I could spend a whole presentation on how to navigate resistance to implementation of these practices. But I think going back to the evidence, especially if somebody's seeking out kind of a more traditional social worker or social work care, or in my case, nursing care, they're seeking more traditional care. And we open that door by bringing up, a few tangible examples and providing evidence as to why we want to implement these. So I hope that answers kind of just on a very broad overview, but happy to talk about that more in the future.
And then Charlotte, I had a question. You might get into this a little bit later, but a few people have mentioned like they have really good intentions, that we've used some of these practices, but how do you make it a routine? Because sometimes it's like, I'll be really good about it for maybe 5 days and then life gets in the way. So how do you find time to prioritize this or make it part of your routine so it's just kind of automatic?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that I like to do is called habit stacking. And when we get into specifically around the test taking examples, we'll describe some ways that we can stack these, some of these practices into things that you're already doing as you get ready for tests. But building in new habits into kind of structures as they already exist. And so that's kind of a main way that we can bring in. The other thing to keep in mind is that these, again, when you I read off a whole laundry list of all of these things that sound really great, but you're like, how the heck am I going to have time to do that between getting food on the table for my kids and getting to work and finishing this thing going through all my emails and how the heck am I supposed to do all of these things? And so I hear you with that. And we start with the smallest micro changes. That's the goal. So when I say a micro change, I mean 10 deep breaths before you walk into work, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth, right? We normally actually only breathe with about 10% of our lung capacity. So 10 deep breaths, 1 minute while you're brushing your teeth to make a gratitude list or notice the things that you see or hear around you. Somebody I briefly glanced at the chat and somebody mentioned nature, which is an unbelievably powerful mind-body medicine practice, just being in nature. And I didn't include that on the slide, but I should have. So thank you to that person, because there's actually a lot of evidence. Talk about, again, we go back to the evidence in terms of skepticism. I've been skeptical about this. I'm like, okay, being outside in nature, I know I feel better, but what does the evidence say? And there is significant evidence that being out in nature for at least just 10, 15 minutes a day, feet on the ground in the dirt or in the grass, if possible, can help to do things like reduce chronic pain, help reduce symptoms of anxiety and stress. So again, just I'm not talking about an hour of meditating. I wish I had time to do an hour of meditating, right? But we're talking about, 30 seconds here, a minute or two here. So trying to, again, chunk those down and make them more digestible. Any other questions that are coming up? Ta-da. All right, so I will keep going. If any other questions come up, though, I am available. And so, yeah, just a couple more studies that this study looked at nursing and medical students, but I think you can extrapolate this to any healthcare students, that participation in doing mind-body skills work helps as a pathway to inner awareness and helps support connecting with others, as well as connecting with the surrounding world. So again, as we go back with nature, think about when you spend 10, 15 minutes in nature, tapping into the world around you. That's a powerful thing. And finally, this very busy slide, the main point of this is that this study looked at the impact of mind-body medicine on helping to enhance and affirm our professional identity in healthcare providers, and really found that doing mind-body skills work, it helps healthcare providers experience enhanced professional identity, helps them promote more self-care, and helps them feel more like they're able to practice what we call mindful awareness, or that present moment awareness. So I just bring these kind of 3 studies to the table just for kind of a little more information about how this can actually be helpful for clinicians to help them feel more empowered and more well equipped to go forward in their clinical roles. And so utilizing this mind-body toolkit, again, the great question about utilizing this and making this in small, kind of bite-sized digestible pieces, the importance of this. And so for breath work, one idea that you can bring is soft belly breathing is a really nice way of breathing where, again, as I said before, we only breathe with about 10% of our lung capacity. Breathing in through the nose and filling up the lungs, and then out the mouth, and imagining your belly being soft and relaxed. That is like a 1-2. It's a great breathing technique that helps to activate our rest and relax response. So, for example, when we walk into the testing facility and sit down and are about to take the test, doing 10 deep breaths and imagining our rest and relax response being more and more activated with every breath, that can really have a profound impact on how we then show up for the test. So again, 10 breaths. For guided imagery or visualization work, one thing we oftentimes do when we want to visualize an outcome is we get really, really hung up on the details. We're like, I want to pass the test by this many points, or I want, my upcoming trip, my vacation to look this way, or I want my new house to look exactly like that. And so visualization can be helpful to dream into the things we want to do, but the way that I like to utilize it is actually that we can visualize into the way we want to feel. As we've learned, the thoughts that we think and the way that we think those thoughts can have a significant impact on our physiology. And that can have a significant impact on the outcome that we experience. And so by visualizing into how we want to feel, and so using it in the example of test prep, imagining walking out of the testing center and that feeling of relief and pride and like, yes, I freaking nailed that, right? Dreaming into feeling like that, because frankly, and there's a philosopher named Alan Watts who talks about this. They said, you don't know the outcome to anything really, right? We don't really have much control over anything. And so you can imagine things going terribly, or we can imagine, what if, like, I just want to see what if I walked out and I thought that I just absolutely kicked butt on that test? And so that idea of shifting into the feeling body, of visualizing into how we want to feel. And again, to get into that headspace, we have to feel like we're in a calm parasympathetic activation, right? We don't want some toxic positivity where we're just imagining doing well about the test, but we're super, super anxious inside and actually we're going to fail. But by visualizing again how we want to feel moving forward, that can be a really powerful practice. And again, it only takes a minute. Meditation, any present moment meditation, and a couple slides, I've got a list of ways you can bring meditation into your day-to-day practices in a way that you don't have to sit on a mat for 30 minutes. So these are things like walking meditation, when you walk the dog or when you drop your kiddo off at school. taking the time to be present without technology and to be present on your walk for that time, paying attention to what you see, what you hear, all of those things, right? We're so tapped in and tuned in with technology all the time. So taking time to be present, whether that's in nature, whether that's, again, just for a few minutes here and there, when you're washing the dishes, becoming present to the feeling of the water on your hands, things of that. So again, just finding small moments. Grounding exercises can be really helpful. So this is kind of one of the tools they use in cognitive behavioral therapy. But when you're feeling activated, coming back to what are a few things I can see? What are a few things I can hear? What are a few things I can feel? Bringing me back to this present moment and what is around me at this time. The energy tracking or journaling, as we already talked about, utilizing that and tracking how you feel throughout the day, tracking, and specifically when you bring that into test prep, it might be helpful perhaps when you think about test taking. I saw a question about, how does anxiety play into this mind-body connection? Like what's happening in the mind-body connection when I'm feeling anxious about a test? And getting curious about what it is about various parts of the test. Is it the sitting down for the test that's anxiety provoking, or being in the room? Is it a specific part of the subject matter, right? Is it the fear of getting a question that is in this one bucket of topics, and that fear? Getting clear on, especially even when you're studying, your energy. What are the parts of the test that you're like, yes, I know this. I've got no problem here. I feel good. I feel energized. What are the parts that you say, oh gosh, crap, that makes me feel really nervous or really anxious? And just, again, it's that awareness, that gentle curiosity. And then finally, the community and connection. Y'all are doing this already by being at an Agents of Change, by being in this group and by connecting with everyone. I love the chat conversations of just, again, community and connection being the idea that this is a really important tool for our toolkit, maybe the most important one. I wanted to pause, good moment to pause if any other questions are coming up. I like that. Sometimes I light a candle, which helps me to slow down and be in the moment. There's actually meditation. If that feels good, you can meditate looking at a candle. Sometimes I enjoy that, especially if I'm feeling like I can't get focused and I sit down to meditate and I'm just thinking about a million things. Lighting a candle and having something to focus on can be really helpful. Listening to calming sounds, absolutely. There's a lot, we didn't even touch on this. There's a lot of evidence that sound therapy can be really helpful. A lot of integrative medicine practices are implementing sound and music into their practices. So having a playlist, having a study playlist that you use, that's songs that make you feel good and calm and present, that can be really helpful. A long soak in the tub, I love that one. Oof, that's my favorite. Absolutely. So really, really great options that we're all talking about. And so finally, again, and this gets a little bit farther out of the evidence-based stuff that we're talking about, but I do think it's really important because there's a lot of evidence on mindset and inner knowing. And when I'm talking about inner knowing, I'm talking about the ability for us to identify our thoughts, our feelings, and our emotions as they arise. I don't know if y'all like Brené Brown, but she talks a lot about that in her newer books, about the importance of being able to tag and just identify what we're feeling or thinking or worrying about in the moment, and how that's a real treasure trove of information. It can teach us a lot, right? Even when we think about things like test prep, it can teach us a lot to be able to identify what we're feeling in any given moment and what's going on in the body. And I bring up that as well because almost all of us are hooked in some way. Our fight or flight response and that stress response that we get, it can actually be neurochemically pretty addicting. And so oftentimes the brain wants to keep us very safe by keeping us in our thought patterns that we've been in. And so especially if things like seeing a test, going to a testing facility, that we've always, right? We've always had that pattern where we got really, really anxious. That learning to step away and create a new pattern can be really, it can feel really hard, and it can be a challenge. And I use the analogy that if our brain is a ski hill, I don't know if any of y'all ski or snowboard, if our brain is a ski hill and our thoughts are the tracks in the snow. The more you think a thought, the deeper the tracks get. And so in order to shift our mindset, we need snowfall, basically. And snowfall can come in the form of present moment awareness. It can come in the form of therapy, of coaching, of breath work, of these mind-body skills. It can come in a lot of different ways. But basically, what we look to do, and we want to shift our mindset, is we want to shake our snow globe, basically. We want to shake it up and we want to get some new snowfall in there. And that is a way of describing neuroplasticity, or the brain's ability to adapt and change over time. And again, what a fascinating and optimistic way of looking at our brains, because for so long it was thought that once we hit adulthood, our brains were pretty much formed, and that was that. And so what an exciting thought that we have the power through shifting our mindset, through shifting our patterns, but first just observing the way that we show up in the world and observing what's going on in our internal environment, that we can start to make those inroads and those changes and make those new tracks in the snow, so to speak. And so some strategies for being mindful of your body, your mindset, your energy. And I love this little graphic. I think I love it so much. I put it on 2 slides. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Right? We have to take care of ourselves first. We hear about this. We have to put on our own oxygen mask first when it comes to self-care, when it comes to health, when it comes to making sure we go to our physical appointments, or making sure that we, are getting enough sleep, all of those things. And again, it can feel really overwhelming to feel like we have to make a ton of changes at once. So just starting with one facet of self-care that can be so incredibly profound. And a lot of us healthcare workers and mental health workers have what I like to call, with love, the martyr mindset. I have the martyr mindset too, traditionally. And that martyr mindset is that mindset of, let me help everyone else and let me fill everyone else's cup, because that's what I want to do, because I'm a giving being. I want to give and give and give. But when we don't give to ourselves first, we run out and we get depleted, right? And so I bring that up because I think that that's something in both my psychiatric job and my coaching work, that is a conversation that comes up almost every time. So if you are somebody who feels like you have a hard time giving to yourself, unless you've already given everything else to everyone else, just know you're not alone. You're not alone in feeling that. I think that our society, we've got a society that kind of prides being a martyr, right? Prides working 100-hour weeks, prides this constant movement and grind. And so I think, again, or that idea of giving everything to other people. So coming back and focusing on what we need in our bodies. Again, learning to witness our thoughts and patterns. Visualizing into our feeling body, as we talked about already. Again, how do we want to feel as we walk into the testing center? How do we want to feel as we walk into work on a Monday and we're setting ourselves up for a new week? This idea that movement's medicine, as we talked about. And finally, one other thing I wanted to touch on is this idea of segmenting your day energetically. This is something Megan and I have talked about offline, but this idea that, I'll give this example because I think we've all been there. So you're driving to work and somebody cuts you off and they're just being a real jerk with a lot of road rage. And you get to work and you're like, oh, that was really stressful. I'm annoyed. I can't believe this person. I can't believe they cut me off. I hope they lose their license, da, 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 da. And we've got that kind of thought process, right? We've got those thoughts running through our head. And maybe those thoughts go away consciously, but subconsciously, we're still energetically really holding on to that person who cut us off, right? We're holding on to that energy. And before we know it, it's 5 p.m. We're cranky. We don't really know why we're cranky. We're just in a bad mood, right? You know that feeling where you're coming home and you're like, God, I'm just in a bad mood. I don't even know where it's from. And as we become more aware of our energy throughout the day, we can become more aware of when something triggers us and when something energetically activates us. And we have the power to, instead of carrying that energy throughout our day, especially for small things, right? Small things like a word here or a bad driver here, that we can segment our energy and we can say, okay, on my drive-in this morning, that was a segment of my day. This guy was a jerk. Cool. And as I move into this next segment, I'm going to honor my energetic needs. And that might mean putting down some of that negative energy that I was carrying from this kind of just, again, subconscious energy. And that takes a little bit of finesse. That takes practice with getting to know how you're feeling throughout the day, getting to know your energetic being and kind of how you're feeling. A few other strategies. So I think that partnership, again, as we go back to this idea of community, partnering with an accountability buddy when it comes to self-care, when it comes to growth mindset or changing our patterns or any of that stuff can be really helpful to partner with that, whether it's with a therapist, a coach, a colleague, but again, having that prioritization kind of in partnership with someone else. So you've got somebody to kind of bounce ideas off of and hold you accountable. Exploring different techniques. So movement, breath work, meditation. Again, there's a ton of different things, a ton of different ways to implement these into your day-to-day practice. They're not going to all look the same for everyone. And that they're not all going to be things that need a long period of time. And so I bring this up because just trying a few different techniques, so different meditations, right? A walking meditation, or maybe a mantra meditation where you repeat a chant, you lighting a candle, as somebody talked about, and using that as a visual aid can be really helpful. Loving kindness meditation, where you imagine sending love out to someone or a group of people and receiving that love back. That can feel really nice sometimes. But there's a lot of different meditation practices, a lot of different movement practices, a lot of different breath work practices. And don't be discouraged if you try something, right? Like, I think that the classic example is somebody sits down to meditate and they're like, what is going on in my head, right? There's a lot of chatter when we sit down and we get present for the first time. And so just being open to that experience, and again, approaching any of this with what? Gentle curiosity being the name of the game, because it's really easy to judge ourselves when we want something to work. We're like, I want to meditate and I want it to go really well. So that can be really helpful. Question?
Yes, Charlotte, there was a few questions in the chat. So the problem with this test is it's timed. So how do you kind of put the stress of I'm up against the clock, I have 4 hours to do this, and really ground yourself to be present in the moment? Because there's actually, I'm sure it was similar to the nursing exams, there's a clock ticking. So how do you kind of do some of these techniques knowing that you only have a certain amount of time? You don't want to spend too much time taking breaks or finding strategies. You can tell me if this is the right direction. I would say this is why it's so important to take practice tests, so you can practice these things before you get into the test. You don't ever want the test, when you go into the test room, that be your first time you've ever sat for 4 hours to do 170 questions. So I always tell our community, you want to at least sit one time before the test day so that you can practice these things. And I say, when you're taking a mock exam or a practice exam, take notes of how you're feeling. Was it halfway through you started to get tired? Was it, 30 minutes in, you're starting to drag? Did you get hungry? Noticing those sensations in your body, so that for test day, you're not completely shocked and you're like, oh my gosh, my blood sugar dropped, or I have a migraine. So if you have anything any feedback on that, because I think the timing portion of it and knowing that you're up against the clock can be really stressful.
Absolutely. I think that anytime you can prepare for an upcoming event, and again, prepare in real-time simulation, that's super helpful, because again, you're priming your nervous system so that it knows what it's walking into. That is really important. I think I'm seeing in the chat, time management is really important, which I totally agree with as well. And one other thing in terms of preparing and again, doing preparation tests, is I would challenge each and every one of you to figure out ahead of testing time what skills might work for you in the moment. So I saw some questions of what happens if my mind totally goes blank? What happens if I go to get up and I can't do it because I'm absolutely frozen out of fear? What happens if, all of these things? And I think that that's beautiful. So contingency planning and saying, okay, here's my 10-second, and again, these are not practices that need to take 5-10 minutes. These are practices that can take 10 seconds. So saying, okay, if my mind goes blank and I'm pardon my French, where the hell am I right now? I don't know what's going on. Refocusing by saying, okay, what are 5 things I can see? What are 4 things I can hear? What are 3 things I can touch on my body? and utilizing that. And that takes 10 seconds, but it's something that helps to bring you back into that present moment. Because what happens when we are in that place where our mind goes blank and we get completely dissociated? That's our freeze response, right? So that's our freeze response, which is actually the other, it's fight, flight, or freeze is the sympathetic nervous system when that gets activated. And that's actually a really important point. I'm really glad that somebody brought that up, because oftentimes we think of our fight or flight response as just we're running away or we're freaking out. But in the most extreme examples of our fight or flight response, think about a deer that sees a threat and it is like paralyzed. That's a freeze response at first, right? Or those fainting goats. That's another great way of a freeze response that I think about, right? Their nervous system gets so activated that they freeze and fall over. And so again, thinking of these things, these different kind of things that might come up during the test as sympathetic nervous system being like, okay, there's my fight or flight response. There's my gas pedal. And it's really, I mean, it's like pedal to the metal right now, right? And so coming back to that through those short practices. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one point too. If you went into the test, maybe you're a multiple time test taker and you had a response like this, I cannot stress enough that you should look into accommodations, because for some people, like, that creates so much anxiety. So if you are someone that you've had a really bad experience and you need extra time, apply for accommodations. There's absolutely no shame in getting what you need. Right. So if this has been an issue for you, I definitely encourage you to talk to your mental health provider or your health provider and kind of like let them know what's going on, because for some people, like, the accommodations, the extra time, having a snack, they're life changing. So if you feel like that's something you need, I have a video on that. You can always feel free to reach out. But like, this test is hard, right? And like, it definitely is a one size fits all model. So that's why I think that there's a lot of issues around it, and passing can be very, very challenging.
Yeah.
We could have a whole discussion on that, but if you need accommodations, I definitely encourage you, like, there's no shame in it. If it's going to help you, use it as a tool.
Yeah, and something someone else brought up that I think is really helpful is on test day, they said you shouldn't change meals and sleep. I think that those lifestyle interventions, right? There's an article I wrote recently that was like, what if we treated lifestyle interventions with the same reverence we treat pharmaceuticals? So things like getting enough sleep, eating healthy, making sure you have fresh fruits and vegetables if you're able, and doing that on whatever budget you need, but making sure that at least you're eating something fresh every day and seeing something green every day and getting enough sleep every day so that you feel like you can go forth and succeed. That those are really important for setting yourself up for the test as well. And kind of, again, in that idea of getting your nervous system accustomed to the environment of the test beforehand. And then there was one question about, what about criticism from a parent or spouse when the test does not go as planned? How do you deal with it, and what is the effect it has on your body? And that's a good one. That's a good question. And so I think one of the first things that can be helpful is just honoring that can feel like crap, right? And honoring that feeling in the body when we've tried our hardest and maybe someone that we love has maybe not the nicest things to say about it, right? Because part of honoring our process and our thoughts and feelings means honoring and allowing a seat at the table for even the ones that hurt, those ones of grief, of fear, of loss, of judgment, of feeling judged, and those feelings. So I think first things first, acknowledging that. And second thing, and this could be a whole nother presentation that we could do about boundary setting, around setting boundaries, even with and it's hardest with the ones we love, right? Hardest with our spouses, with our parents, with our kids, because we love them so much. But setting healthy boundaries around, if I'm trying my hardest for this test, no matter what the outcome, that I would like support, and I, those kind of things. And again, this is a conversation that we could go in much more detail on about boundary setting. But I first just want to acknowledge that that's a really challenging thing to experience, and challenging and allowing those feelings in the body, and then allowing them to move through the body, right? Whether that's with exercise, with connecting with a therapist or a coach or someone you have a therapeutic alliance with. I don't really, whoever that is. But that those are two really important practices, I think, that should be like number one and number two. So hopefully that helps a bit.
I know we only have a few minutes left, so I want to leave some time for some closing thoughts, but I just wanted to add some things too, kind of going off what you were talking about. I think oftentimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, like I have to pass this exam by a certain date because so many things are riding on this, right? Promotions at work and salary increases. But you know yourself better than anyone. There's no also like no judgment, no shame in pushing it back if you need to. I have some people that are like, I'm caring for my elderly parent, or I have this, and this going on. Like, you know yourself best. If you need to push the date back because you're not physically, mentally ready, like do that. Do you want to just give like a quick thing, Charlotte, on like how we can't think our best when we're in overload mode, and how like that actually could lead to worse outcomes on the test if we're just not our best selves physically, mentally, and that mind-body connection?
Totally. It's I had an old professor who said to me, and this is I think the easiest way I have to explain it, you only have so many F's to give throughout the day in a 24-hour period, right? We only have so many F's we can give in a 24-hour period. And if our F's are focused on other things, right? And if our nervous system is activated in other things, in other kind of branches or things, we've got a million other things that we're taking care of. We don't have the attention to focus 100% on our test. We literally only have so many F's to give. And so it's a kind of a way, again, bringing like some comedy and some gentle curiosity with this, but turning back and saying, okay, I've only got like a dozen F's to give. And how many F's am I going to give? How many F's is this test going to take? Because it's probably going to take a lot. And I just want to make sure that I am prepared and that I have enough of that mental bandwidth to be able to show up and take care of myself and show up again as the best version of myself for this test. So. And be kind to yourself. Yes. Be kind to yourself. We are all out here doing the best we can. And just, I think as we start to wrap up, just thanking your body, right? For all that it does. And the fact that 99.999% of the things that we do and our body does are involuntary. We don't have to pay attention. We don't have to do anything. It just does. Same thing with our brain. It just goes on and it does without us needing anything in return. So making sure you just turn back some of that gratitude and thanking your body and your mind for getting you through the day. Because again, I think we say and talk to ourselves in ways that we would never, ever, ever talk to somebody else, right? So be kind to yourself. And yes, you will all pass. Again, I visualize you walking into that test and just kicking its butt. And if there's anything in terms of, I'll add here for just as we wrap up, a little bit more about me. I'll share my contact info out and Megan can disseminate that. Check out my website. I have an integrative health podcast if you want to check that out. Megan's going to be on it in the upcoming months. So you can definitely listen to both of us just chat all things integrative mental health. And I'll send out my connection info as well. Thank you so much.
Yes, I want to thank you. You will see more of Charlotte. We're going to do a follow-up Q&A. I mean, we could be here for hours and hours. So this was just kind of like scratching the surface on all that she has, all of her insight from the medical perspective to share with us. I'm going to hopefully have her on our podcast too to give some tips. She'll be writing a few blog posts for us, so check it out. She also will have some offerings. She does so a lot of times, we're focused on test prep, but I think so many times we forget that sometimes we need either mind-body connection help or coaching, right? So she'll be I'll send out her info about some of the offerings she's doing as well. But check out her podcast. It's really awesome. She just launched it a couple weeks ago. So congrats on that. And I'm just really happy that we can bring this aspect into test prep because I think it's something that is not really highlighted much at all. And you can't be your best self if your mind and body is not healthy. So I'm really happy to have her here as our expert. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can email them to me. I'll make sure they get to her. I will feature her again on our Instagram, so you can follow her. But I hope that you guys enjoy this. Like, there's test taking things that you can take from it, but I think this applies to anything in your life, personal life, professional life. We all need to sometimes just take a time to take a breather. Any burning last questions? People are just saying very positive things. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. And I think it's good that every once in a while we don't focus on test prep stuff, right? Like, this was nice and light. Like, we're not like, you have to pass this exam and we're going to talk about clinical theories and diagnosis and medication. So I hope that this was a nice change of pace, and that you kind of leave today with some strategies. So before we do wrap up, in the chat, if you could just put one thing from today, one takeaway point or something you're going to commit to in your studying, and I'll read some of them out, because I always like people to have some takeaways and some action steps. So in the chat, what is something that you're going to commit to, or something you took away that you're going to take with you in your testing journey? Grounding, mindfulness.
Ooh, being more present when I walk. I love that. 10 deep breaths.
Take it slow. I like that. Our lives move so fast. I am so bad about that. Like, this was just really nice to kind of just sit and like be in good community and good fellowship. So I'm very thankful for this too. Someone said making sure I have enough F's. I love that.
Yes. Amazing. Well, as we wrap up, I heard a lot of people say breathe. And so why don't we just wrap up with 3 deep breaths, kind of just like we started. We'll end this out with 3 deep breaths. So inhale, go ahead, empty your lungs all the way out. And then inhale through the nose. And sigh it out. We'll do that 2 more times. Inhaling through the nose. Filling those lungs up as much as we can. And then at the top, just a little bit more, and then breathing out. And last time, breathing in through the nose. And exhale out the mouth. Thank you guys so much. This was such a joy to chat with you, and I'm so excited to just be here to support you all on your journey. Again, reach out to me anytime. I'm always here. So thank you.
I see a lot of smiles, so that's always a very good thing. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for taking the time and sharing your expertise with us. And we look forward. So like I said, this is great for anyone. So I'm sure some of you have maybe already taken the test. So if you see her having an offering coming up in the fall and you've already tested and you are a licensed social worker, feel free to join us. I mean, this applies to everyone. So thank you, Charlotte. We're excited to have you join our team.
Thanks all. Have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Bye.